Okay, here we go. This is still section 5.1. It's just another type of problem or something that you can do to simplify trig expressions. So you can see that this is an expression because it doesn't have an equal sign. We're doing this so that we can eventually solve equations. So you've got to do these fundamentals so that you can later solve equations with trig functions. So I'm looking at these and they both just look like a mess, or both terms look like a mess. And the first thing that might pop in your head is, do I have anything that is an identity? Well, I have a 1 and a minus, and I've got a trig function. I've got a 1 and a plus and a trig function. But in order for those to be Pythagorean triples, they have to have squareds. So this would have to be sine squared, that would have to be sine squared. So replacing these with a Pythagorean triple or Pythagorean identity is not going to work. Second thing you might be thinking is there anything, can I change to sines and cosines to make it easier? Well, everything's in sines and cosines, so that's probably not going to be a very good option. The third thing is what we just got done doing, which is factoring. These are two fractions. I would not suggest trying to factor fractions. So that leaves us combining these fractions into one fraction to see if we can eliminate some things. So if I want to add these two fractions, or actually I'm going to subtract these two fractions, the first thing you have to do is get common denominators. So the common denominator is going to be this term, or this denominator, times this denominator. So I need both of these fractions to have 1 minus sine x times cosine x as its denominator. So I need a 1 minus sine x times cosine x over here, and I need a 1 minus sine x times a cosine x over here. So I'm rewriting them with common denominators. So you go back, whatever you do to the denominator, you also have to do to the numerator. So this denominator was missing this cosine x. So that means I have to multiply the numerator by cosine x as well. So this is sine x cosine x times another cosine x. And that's just to get a common denominator here. Over here, this fraction, the denominator had cosine x, but it didn't have this, 1 minus sine x. So that means I need to multiply the numerator by 1 minus sine x, and I've already got 1 plus sine x in my numerator. So we've pretty well just made it even a bigger mess. But if we simplify this and combine these two into one fraction, let's see if we can find some shortcuts or find some identities that we could replace with. So here we have a sine x, and I'm going to write this as a cosine squared x, minus, I'm going to multiply these together. The way that you're going to do that is by foiling. So I'm going to take 1 times 1. This has to be in parentheses. So 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times a positive sign is a positive sine x. Negative sine x times 1 is a negative sine x. And negative sine x times a positive sine x is a negative sine squared x. So that's the numerator. We got common denominators, so we know that the denominator is 1 minus sine x times cosine x. And I only have to write that one time. It's just like, if you have 3/7 plus 2/7. I'm putting these two together, the numerators together to get 5. I keep the denominator, would be 5/7. Okay, so let's simplify this over here. Here's a positive sign and a negative sine x. Those are gone. So we basically have sine x cosine squared x minus 1 minus sine squared x all over 1 minus sine x times cosine x. So the only thing I did here was cancel those out, and then I rewrote it. Okay, right here we've got a 1, and we've got a trig function squared. So let's go back and look at our Pythagorean triples, or our Pythagorean identities. we know that the identity is sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. Well, I have 1 minus sine squared x. If I move that over, I have cosine squared x equals 1 minus sine squared x. So that means I can replace this whole thing, this whole quantity, with cosine squared x. So we're going to do that. So sine x cosine squared x minus cosine squared x. And really I can get rid of my parentheses here because I only have one term and it's not doing anything. Over 1 minus sine x times cosine x is my denominator. Okay, this is not 0, cosine x squared minus cosine x squared, because it's being multiplied by that sine x. So here's where we're going to incorporate what we just got done doing with the factoring. This term has a cosine squared. This term is cosine squared. So that means we can factor that out. I'm going to erase some of this up here so I can write up here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is factor this cosine squared out. So if I factor a cosine squared x out, just in the numerator, that's going to leave, in this term, I'm taking this out front, so it leaves sine x minus, I'm taking the whole term out, so it's going to be a 1. That's over 1 minus sine x times cosine x. Okay, now what we're doing is this is a term times this term. This is a quantity times this term. So we're multiplying everything, so we could cancel if we wanted to, but they have to be exactly the same thing to cancel. You may see real quick that here's a cosine. I can take that one with one of these. So that's just going to leave me with a cosine in the numerator. And I still have this sine x minus 1 over 1 minus sine x. Okay, so we made that a 1. So we have 1 cosine x in the numerator. Okay, these are quantities that are almost identical. If I would factor a negative, I need the sign to be positive and I need the 1 to be positive as well. So, or actually I need the 1 to be a negative. So, and here I have the exact opposite. So what you can do, if you're just off by signs, is factor out a negative. So if I factor a negative out here, that means I can make this a negative and I can make this a positive. So now these are exactly the same. I could rewrite that as negative cosine x times 1 minus sine x. Doesn't matter what order I write them in as long as I have the correct signs in front of the term. So the 1 was positive, the 1's positive, sine is negative, sine is negative. And then I have 1 minus sine x in the denominator. Now I can cancel this entire term. And the only thing we have left is negative cosine x. And I forgot to tell you at the beginning, but that's what we wanted to simplify that to. That's pretty rough. That's pretty complicated. You're just going to have to practice them. Again, you can Snapchat me if you want to, if you've got questions. I imagine we'll have to do a couple of these in our Zoom meeting on Wednesday. I have a Zoom meeting at noon on Wednesday if you have questions. You can send me a text. We can FaceTime, whatever works. So we'll practice on these this week and probably next week as well. We'll just have to see how well we do. So there you have it. Hope it works out for you. These are fun and exciting.